Chapter 1. Adrian looked through the window, through the trees, and saw light, quiet snow falling. Her eyes settled on the reflection of her soon-to-be new husband sleeping soundly, and she knew she had made a mistake. It wasn't the wedding or the honeymoon, which made her nerves uneasy and her neck tighten. Her mother had planned everything. A honeymoon in Hawaii would be nice, she thought. But that's a crazy reason to marry someone. She had met Paul in high school when she let it be known around school that whoever had the biggest penis in their senior class would get a blowjob, although not necessarily from her. It never happened. It was a prank, and she confessed to him because she needed a date for the prom. They dated her senior year and went off to college together. "You're supposed to marry in college," her mother said. "You have the same interests." They did. They loved hiking, camping, and cycling, but there had to be more to it than reading the same books and all that other stuff. What about sex? Isn't that important too? She thought. They had to be compatible when it came to sex, and there were a lot of things lacking in that department, including misrepresenting the size of his manhood. She could enjoy lots of sex every day if it happened, but it didn't. Adrian came to realize that Paul was a once-a-month kind of guy, if that, which seemed strange for a virile and active young man. He stated that it would be advisable to wait until they were married. Isn't that a woman's line? Wait until we're married, Adrian thought. She took a second look at Paul, clothed in a pair of pajamas with pictures of sailboats in varied colors, lying with his back to her. This is it, she thought, and tiptoed quietly across the floor, throwing a few clothes into an overnight bag. She crept out of their apartment through the fresh new snow. Struggling to put her key in the ignition, cranking up the car, her old Honda groaned and she grimaced. Her eyes were narrow slits of determination, but she still thought Paul would catch her before she aimed the car east, going home. It had been a mistake living with Paul and agreeing to marry him, one she would soon rectify. No invitations had been sent out, no hearts had been broken, probably not even Paul's. His days were filled working on his thesis, something about why sex before marriage ruined said marriage. How about why no sex makes for a boring life, boring relationships and divorce, Adrian thought. Why would he bat an eye when he found out she wasn't in their bed? He wouldn't even notice that she had left until Sunday, and today was Friday. Paul would get up Saturday morning, take a shower, dress in his mom jeans, eat some of that green shit he mixed up to drink for breakfast, and head to his Saturday classes. Then he would go out to a bar with his drunken, overachieving friends, and it would be Sunday before he woke up on the floor or couch of their apartment. The sky was dark, except for a brilliant large moon, no stars, but she hadn't noticed them in years. She was too busy with her studies, which almost compensated for the lack of attention and lack of arousal that Paul was capable of undertaking, since she had been raped. Adrian had been raped 1 year to the day tomorrow, a Saturday night, and Paul was sleeping like now and said he had heard nothing. He didn't hear when his frat brothers sneaked into their room as Adrian slept alone, while he was in the next room on the sofa passed out. He didn't hear her screams as they each took turns with her. In the dead of night, she glanced at the full moon. It signaled the beginning of a new life. Nevertheless, it was dangerous for a woman to be driving alone, especially going east on I-80. She lived outside of Lake Tahoe, and as she drove with the music loud, she hummed, sang, and swayed to the music, happy to be free from the marriage obligation, and Paul with his dead, deaf, dull ass. Now she had to concentrate and look hard for the turnoff south to Lake Tahoe. With dark forest on both sides of her and the snow on the road, it proved difficult. The elevation was 6,000 feet up in the mountains on a slippery road, with snow still falling hard. Driving slowly because her tires weren't that great, no snow tires or chains, she inched along. A 2-hour drive from Sacramento, California, turned into a 3-hour drive. Her phone rang. She turned to it. "I'm not answering." She yelled at her purse. "I know it's you, Paul, but I'm not listening and I'm not answering." Adrian had been sure he wouldn't notice her disappearance, but somehow it looked like he had. "Did your dick suddenly get hard after 6 months?" She screamed over the music, talking to her purse as if it was Paul. She turned her head to face the road. The snow fell in large flakes the size of a silver dollar. To the side of the narrow highway, a snow-covered sign appeared. She crawled by without seeing it. She hadn't been traveling too fast to see it, never mind read the sign, but without streetlights, all she could see was what was ahead. The windshield was quickly covering with snowflakes, and the wipers slowing down. "I forgot to change the wiper blades, oh shit," she shouted, pounding on the steering wheel. The phone rang again. She turned her head for a few seconds, and when she switched it back, a large buck sprang across her path, and hot on his heels a wolf. "Oh God," she said as she swung the wheel. All she could see was the dark trunk of a tree coming into focus through the snow. She heard a crash, and everything went fuzzy, then dark. Adrian's old gray Honda hit the deer, or the wolf, and a tree. It was hard to tell which did the most damage. The Honda had lasted through 4 years of high school, going to the movies, and carrying her friends everywhere. 4 years of college, with Paul using it when his old Toyota finally gave out, because of excessive abuse, but it took only one deer or wolf, it didn't matter which, to permanently disable and destroy her silver Honda. Waking up, Adrian shook her head, blinked her eyes to see her car angled to the side near a ravine, broken and helpless. She loved that car. It was like a friend. It lay teetering on its right side. She sat up and shook her head to clear it, sucked in air, then passed her hand over her face. Eyes still working, no cuts in her face, just a slight bruise to the knee from the steering wheel. She was stiff, but she was used to that. It was no worse than taking a 10-mile hike up and down a small mountain. She sighed. "Wow. It could have been worse," she said. She adjusted her skirt, which should have been layered over her exercise pants. It had slid up and wrapped around her breasts. She breathed clear, frigid air coming in from her front window, unfastened her seatbelt, and tried to open the door, pushing and pushing, but it wouldn't budge. She would have to climb out through the front window, but she was afraid the car would tip over. Ah, hell, can this get worse? Adrian thought the deer had broken it, but that couldn't be. It was as if someone pulled it from its frame. She tried lowering down the window near the driver's side, but it would go only so far, so she took off her shoe and pounded on the window until it fell from its gears, but still it slipped only a few inches. In a moment of confusion, with one shoe in her hand, she made the decision to climb through the front window onto the hood. She hoisted herself over the steering wheel, head first. Heaven help her if she slipped. She moved gingerly, holding on to the raised hood, swinging her body around to the left, and sliding off little by little until her feet hit the ground. One headlight from her damaged car flickered on and off, illuminating a trail ahead. Taking a minute to count her blessings for the full moon reflecting on the snow, she turned to face the path ahead of her. She spotted a large pool of blood and panicked. Could she have been hurt, she wondered. She knew she hadn't, but something had, and a wounded wolf, if it was, that was a mean beast, so she began running. When she stopped, she was standing in the middle of a dense forest. There was no way she could get out of this wilderness, except to try to climb back to the highway, but that appeared impossible. Then she remembered she hadn't taken her phone. She turned to rush back, but all she heard was her car tumbling over and over, finally making a wheezing sound, as if taking its last breath. Going back to the car was now no longer possible, because her old Honda lay buried in its final resting place, a deep gorge, and likely soon would be covered in deep snow. "What the fuck do I do now?" she murmured. She stood looking, and not believing what she saw. What the fuck just happened? She walked dazed in a circle, breathing hard. "I'm going to find my way out. I can't be afraid. The moon's bright and the snow's soft. I can see a little, so I'm just going to walk. There must be a house nearby. I can't be far from the interstate. she said to herself as she ambled along, stumbling through long grass and bumping into trees. She wandered through the thick forest, trying to stay on a path of Indian trails. She wasn't sure where they would lead, but she had no choice. She could feel the temperature dropping. It was cold, and she began to shiver. I'm going to die in this wilderness. She didn't know how long she had been walking. Where am I? She mumbled. Adrian stopped, bent forward to catch her breath, with her hands holding onto her thighs. The freezing air didn't help, and she wasn't dressed for this season. Skirt over exercise pants and jean jacket over a cotton shirt. Thank goodness, she was smart enough to layer, but she wasn't smart enough to stay off the highway at night. Finally, the snow stopped, but it was still bitterly cold. The weather changes overnight at this elevation, she thought. She tucked her hands under her arms, rocking back and forth. After lumbering around for 3 hours, tired and hungry, she looked around for a place to sleep. Gathering the leaves on the ground, and with fallen limbs from the pine trees, she made a bed. Then she covered herself with more branches and lay down. She was just so tired. She prayed that whatever animal stumbled across her would eat her quickly. She didn't want to suffer. Curled up under a tree, with the sounds of the forest and noise in the trees from bugs, a wolf growling and calling in the distance kept her on edge. Fighting off large ants had taken up her night. Sleeping near a tree was the worst decision she had ever made. Second was Paul. When she woke the next day, her body had bug bites on her arms and legs, but she was alive, although hungry and thirsty. The sun was high in the sky, and she knew it must have been almost noon. The day had dawned mild, better than yesterday, and with no falling snow and daylight, at least she could see. Standing, she saw a large ranch way in the distance. It was marked off by a huge white fence that stretched for miles. She couldn't make out the name of the ranch on the fence, it was just way too far away. Set against a mountain range, a house backed up against it with tall pine trees almost hiding it from visitors. She had to make a decision. Should I risk going to that ranch, which could take days to reach without any food, or try to look for food? Adrian knew something about survival in the wilderness, not much, but she knew enough to know she had to find fresh water. She knew by the terrain and the mountain ranges that water was plentiful, but where? And how long would it take to find some? But she also knew that where there was water, there would be predatory animals. With her small frame, she would look like a helpless deer. She turned, walking through thick brush and trees. A mountain towered in front of her. She didn't know how she could climb it, or if she attempted it, what would be on the other side. It wasn't as good an option as the notion of walking through acres of ranchland to reach the house. The house could be vacant if she made it, and there were dogs to consider. A ranch as large as that would have dogs to protect the livestock from wolves. She had still not decided when she heard rushing water over the sound of her thoughts. A lake? Or a river, she said. She perked up. She could survive on water, but hunger would consume her thoughts, and without food her body would weaken. She would take one day at a time, and this day had just begun. I'm alive, she said, smiling, which was all she was concerned about now. She hadn't been attacked and eaten by wild animals as she slept. Take one day at a time, she repeated, as she tottered along. Through the trees she saw something white dart across her path with lightning speed. It's a wolf, she said. A huge white wolf with blood oozing from its paws, she murmured. Hearing a loud wolf cry, her hands shook and she broke into a run, which was ridiculous. How could she outrun a wolf? If it was hurt, she might have a chance. And don't they run in packs? That was another question that worried her. What's the use, she said, out of breath and slowing to a walk. Was she seeing things? Adrian was sure she had seen something. She slogged along the trail leading into a clearing, but the trail was deceptive. She had been walking for hours, and still she hadn't reached the water. The noise from her stomach made sounds animals could pick up from a distance. Yet she kept walking. What else could she do? Just lie down and die. That wasn't an option. She didn't want to be prey to the next animal on its noonday hunt looking for lunch. As she glanced around, she remembered this area. She had read about it in books about legends and myths, and how the families who lived in the area for centuries talked of werewolves. How they had integrated into the population of humans and became upstanding, respectable citizens, like businessmen, mayors, or governors, where humans couldn't tell them from regular people. She dismissed that thought. Who believes in werewolves, she thought. The small lake appeared closer now. When it finally came into view, she stumbled from the weakness in her legs. She felt the urge for water, and she ran a little but stopped. In the wilderness, animals hunted prey at waterholes. She knew the dangers of the water. Snakes, wolves, and mountain lions could be lurking about. "Where is that huge white wolf?" she murmured, turning to look behind her. Adrienne decided to take cover behind a large boulder, until she could see if it was all clear. Only then would she venture near the water. Crouching behind a rock for half of the day, the sun lowered behind the mountain range, Adrienne made a dash for the lake. She reached its edge where a small stream stretched out near its mouth. She lay down and cupped a handful of sparkling fresh water. Then she bent her head and lapped up a mouthful. Her eyes raising, they caught a glance of a waterfall just upstream, and on the cliff she saw it, standing at the top of the falls, a magnificent white wolf. He lifted his head and let out a chilling howl, making the hair on her body tingle. On her hikes with Paul, she noted that sometimes waterfalls hid entrances to caves. She had to get there to check, because she needed the protection from the elements. She knew she couldn't make it outside with the chill of the nights, and with that wolf tracking her. Indians were known to inhabit some of those caves years ago, she thought, getting to her feet and walking in the direction of the rushing falls. There are many dangers in caves, bears hibernating with young cubs, and bats, but it was far better than sleeping out in the opening. She never even considered a den of wolves. She had to do something. She trudged on toward the waterfall. Whenever you were traveling on foot, everything appeared to be farther than it actually was. Eventually she reached the waterfall, and as she had thought, it cloaked a cave. She picked up a stick. "If I have to go, I'm not going easy," she said, holding it out in front of herself. Standing at the mouth of the cave, still hesitant to enter, she thought, "If this is a bear's cave, there's no way I am walking out of here." Once again she had no choice. Slowly and cautiously she entered. "So far so good," she whispered. With her stick in her hand, she walked through to another chamber. Inside the main chamber of the cave, to her surprise, were embers left